A NATO official has said at least 20 people have died in the chaotic scenes around the airport in the last week. Tens of thousands of Afghans are still racing to flee the country. The Biden administration has ordered the emergency use of commercial aircraft to move evacuees from Afghanistan once they've flown out of Kabul. Such an order is rare. It's only the third time it's been used. Britain's former Prime Minister Tony Blair, who sent troops into Afghanistan 20 years ago, has delivered a rebuke to President Biden, saying Afghanistan had been abandoned because of what he said was an imbecilic political slogan about ending the forever wars. Tropical storm Henri is set to make landfall on the U.S. East Coast on Sunday, with millions in New England and New York's Long Island bracing for flash flooding, violent winds and power outages.
We have all watched with horror the scenes playing out in Afghanistan, but for the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, it is especially jarring. Admiral Mike Mullen was the president's top military advisor 10 years ago. At the time, he supported the strategy to stay in the country and train the Afghan military. But this week, we asked him to reflect on those decisions after watching the Taliban swiftly take over. You, in 2011, said the strategy was the right one, to try and train up the Afghan forces.
Right.
When you look back now?
The capitulation of the Afghan forces obviously is getting great focus right now. In retrospect, it didn't work because they stood down, and I think they actually stood down so that they individually could survive, given the Taliban were coming back in. I thought we could build the army and give them a chance to create structures which would run a country in a much more modern fashion. That just is not the case.
So when you look back on those years, are you really kind of beating yourself up over that?
Well, I am, yeah. What I thought we could do, and I advised President Obama accordingly, is I thought we could turn it around. Obviously, I was wrong.
You've also heard President Biden say, look, we should have gotten out 10 years ago. We should have gotten out after they killed Osama bin Laden. You were there when they killed Osama bin Laden.
Sure.
You were the chairman. Should we have gotten out then?
I think in retrospect, yeah, we should have. I don't think it was possible for us to just abruptly walk away right after we killed bin Laden, but clearly we could have gone earlier than we did. As I look back, and a lot of people are critical of the president right now, President Biden had it right back then. He was focused singly on counterterrorism, and his advice was along those lines, and he certainly said that. And I give him credit for that.
Did the mission fail?
I think complete failure, no. Clearly taking out bin Laden was a huge impact in terms of al-Qaeda and what was represented there. I'm not inclined to just lay it on, yes, it was a success or it was a failure. I think we're somewhere in between. There's a lot of finger pointing, a lot of blame, and I'm not anxious to do that or participate in this. I think we need to learn lessons. I think we need to examine in the military that can-do spirit and that can we understand why we too often say yes to a mission when we should say no. Nobody wants the Saigon image, and obviously we ended up with another Saigon image that will last permanently, quite frankly, whether we like it or not.
When you look at those pictures, when you see babies being put over the walls and taken by a soldier, you know those people.
Yeah, it just speaks to the desperation, and it speaks to the fear, and it speaks to the Taliban that they know. And they know them better than we. My heart just breaks for the Afghan people.
When you think of those who have served and those Gold Star families, what would you say?
Well, to those families in particular, their son or daughter served in a way that answered the call of their country. We can never forget those sacrifices as a country, and they served, at the pleasure of the President of the United States, who asked them to go in harm's way, and they did.
Thanks to Admiral Mullen for those honest reflections.
Japan is facing its first weekend under an expanded state of emergency as it battles the coronavirus. But there's no sign infections are slowing, with Tokyo reporting its highest ever tally for a Sunday. New cases hit 4,392 in the capital. That's down about 700 from Saturday, but up 97 from the week before. The 7-day average has jumped 11% from a week ago. Tokyo officials say 8 patients were confirmed dead on Sunday, while another 271 had serious symptoms. Some people are being forced to recover at home to ease the strain on hospitals. That includes this woman in her 50s who tested positive last month despite receiving 2 shots of vaccine. She lives alone in Tokyo and says it was tough to recover. She kept notes through the experience. Entries show she had a high fever, a cough, and lost her sense of smell and taste. She says she started thinking about death for the first time. People isolating at home are supposed to be provided meals and advised to monitor their oxygen levels. But the woman says she got neither. She thinks authorities are overwhelmed.
I felt deserted. I'm very worried about what will happen to older people who live alone and don't have any family to support them. I still feel scared.
Meanwhile, the virus is casting its shadow over the Tokyo Paralympics, which kick off on Tuesday. 30 more people visiting for the games have tested positive, including 2 athletes. That's a record daily count for people involved in the event. The total now stands at 131. Japan reported more than 22,000 cases across the nation on Sunday, and the health ministry says the number of hospitalized patients in serious condition has hit 1,891, marking the 10th daily record in a row. The Japanese government says it plans to make the so-called antibody cocktail treatment available nationwide to patients who don't have serious symptoms. The treatment was authorized in Japan last month. Patients received 2 drugs by IV drip simultaneously to suppress the virus. The government plans to rush the drugs to hospitals in prefectures where a state of emergency is in place. It had initially targeted patients being treated in hospitals, but it recently started allowing patients isolating at hotels and temporary medical facilities to receive it with some conditions. It is a response to the difficulty of finding vacant hospital beds. Patients recuperating at hotels in Tokyo and the western city of Fukuoka are already receiving the drugs. The U.S. pharmaceutical company that developed the treatment says the reactions may include fever, headache, and trouble breathing. The firm says there could also be unknown side effects as the clinical data are limited. A Japanese expert says it is important to use the treatment safely and effectively.
I think it will be necessary to carefully check whether there are side effects and to adjust the system so the treatment can be widely used.
Some doctors say it should also be given to patients isolating at home, but the health ministry is cautious, maintaining that patients should be monitored by medical workers. Fears are mounting that some people have been dropping their guard even as infections surge. Now, Japan's minister in charge of the coronavirus response has suggested restrictions could get tougher. Nishimura Yasutoshi spoke in an NHK program on Sunday. He said some people are becoming less cautious. He thinks youngsters are growing particularly weary of being careful. Nishimura said the government will try to figure out what it can do under current laws.
The National Governors Association has proposed that the government put coronavirus emergency restrictions in place nationwide. The government will take the proposal into account and will consider measures to curb the spread of infections by any means.
The state of emergency currently covers Tokyo and 12 other prefectures. Quasi-emergency restrictions are in place in 16 prefectures. All measures run through September 12th. Nishimura said the government aims to halve the number of people out and about, as well as making sure medical services can cope. He said that before the emergency declaration is lifted, the government will consider ways to ease restrictions on people who have been vaccinated. But the chief of the anti-coronavirus advisory panel says he's still worried.
I am concerned that people's activities will increase with the end of the summer holiday season. The situation could become more serious unless even tougher measures are taken.
Omi says his panel asked the government to reduce the flow of people by 50% from normal levels, but the rate only dropped by about 35% and is now moving in the wrong direction. Sunday marks a week since the Taliban seized control of Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. They toppled the former government of President Ashraf Ghani. The group is now trying to consolidate power as some forces in the country still actively oppose it. Taliban leaders have held talks with officials from the ousted government on forming a new administration. A senior official of the ousted government tweeted on Saturday he had discussed a comprehensive political solution with the Taliban. Abdullah Abdullah was chairman of the High Council for National Reconciliation under Ashraf Ghani and had led the peace process. The Taliban are expected to press ahead with talks led by Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, the group's number 2. Meanwhile, multiple media outlets report that local forces on Saturday attacked and retook an area in the northern province of Baghlan. It had been under Taliban control. In Kabul, thousands of desperate people gather at the airport each day in the hopes of fleeing the new regime. The U.S. Defense Department said on Saturday it had helped about 17,000 people evacuate over the week, including 2,500 U.S. nationals. The U.S. military says one woman gave birth on Saturday inside one of its planes. Air Mobility Command tweeted that an Afghan woman went into labor during a flight from the Middle East. After landing in Germany, medical staff boarded the plane and helped her deliver a baby girl. The mother and child are reportedly in good condition at a medical facility nearby. Japan is also preparing to send Self-Defense Force aircraft to Afghanistan on an evacuation mission. The plan is to help Japanese workers at international organizations, local embassy staff, and their families leave the country. Foreign ministry sources say SDF planes may evacuate more than 500 people. They say government officials will consider how to move evacuees to an airport in Afghanistan and to which country they should be taken. Officials from Japan's foreign and defense ministries left for Afghanistan on Sunday to study the situation there. Last week, the government evacuated Japanese staff from Japan's embassy in Kabul using a British military plane. New York City has held a concert to give a boost to the local economy hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic.
Of Carlos Santana!
The homecoming concert was held in a section of Central Park that can accommodate 60,000 people. Bad weather forced the event to be canceled after about 2.5 hours. But people welcomed the chance to enjoy themselves outdoors following coronavirus restrictions.
I'm excited about it. Large crowds are needed to get everyone's morale back up. A lot of negative press lately, so it's just good to have large numbers and good vibes.
The city organized the concert in hopes of a comeback, but it is also dealing with a resurgence of coronavirus cases, especially with the highly transmissible Delta variant. Members of the audience were required to show proof of vaccination or a negative PCR test done in the last 72 hours. Those were the stories for this hour.